This is a large room which is actually split in two. This is where we'll be holding meetings and holding tastings for students and sometimes with MWs as well. But if you actually look at this wall, here are just some of the key dates in our history from the first exam in 1953. I think really important things to look at. 1970s, our first female Master of Wine, Sarah Morphew-Stephen.
Hi, I'm Sid Patel. I'm at the Master of Wines office. I'm the CEO of Beverage Trade Network, and this is for Inside the Drinks Business. Super excited. Thanks for having me, Adrian and Sarah. Here, Adrian's thank you. Adrian's Executive Director of Master of Wine, and Sarah leads the study programs and development for the Master of Wine program. So pleasure. We're going to talk about really what it is like running Master of Wine office, and behind the scenes what value you're going to gain as a student if you apply for Master of Wine, and more importantly how all this come together, especially from this office here. Adrian, over to you. Why don't you give a little rundown about your journey, your more about your role and what you do here. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Ed. Well, first of all, pleasure to have you here and for us to be able to give you a little bit of insight as to what's happening at the Institute. In terms of my own background, I'm probably a little bit unique in the sense that I am a Master of Wine. I am the Executive Director and have been for the last 2.5 years. And prior to that, I was actually the Chairman of the Institute and a member of the Institute's board, which we call Council. I've been there for about eight years. Prior to joining the Institute, I was actually the Chief Executive of a winery out in New Zealand. So I was running that for about 2.5 years, a winery called Yealands.
And is that from New Zealand?
Yeah, based in New Zealand, based in Marlborough, down in the Awatri Valley. So I was doing that for 2.5 years. And as a consequence of a variety of circumstances, I started to get involved in running the day-to-day operations from early 2020, and I've remained in situ since then. As travel to New Zealand is probably not the most easy thing to do over the last 2 years. So it's been a fascinating time to be involved, working with what's a really fantastic team, as we've had to evolve and respond to the very many challenges that COVID has posted, not just for the Institute, but for everybody in their working lives and in their personal lives. It's been a really challenging time, but I like to think that we've demonstrated that the Institute is actually a really dynamic organisation. And in spite of those challenges, we've remained incredibly active over this period. I think that puts us in a really, really strong position as we look towards the future. So it's been a fascinating couple of years. I've certainly enjoyed every minute of it, and but one of the big fundamental activities we're engaged in is the education program, and that's why we have Sarah Harrison here, who's our head of program study and development, or a version of those words, and and Sarah's also been with us for a couple of years, and she's been really at the helm in terms of helping drive the changes that we've had to put in place to be able to respond, keep our students engaged and keep the Institute very, very active over this period.
Super. Hey guys, so I'm in the Master of Wine office with Adrian, Executive Director. He's going to show us around here. We were just walking in the tasting room. Adrian, why don't you just show us about the great wall you have here?
So this is a large room which is actually split in two. This is where we'll be holding meetings and holding tastings for students and sometimes with MWs as well. But if you actually look at this wall, here are just some of the key dates in our history from the first exam in 1953. I think really important things to look at. 1970s, our first female Master of Wine, Sarah Morphew-Stephen. And right now, in the last 10 years, the gender split between male and female is pretty well 50-50. Wow. We go look at this 1988, our first Master of Wine from outside the UK was Michael Hill Smith, who's based in the Adelaide Hills. And since then, that's another 34 years, so halfway through our history. Right now, we have as many international Masters of Wine as we do have based in the UK. And I think these are really, really important statistics which show our commitment towards internationalisation, which I think mirrors the true global wine trade, but also our commitment towards diversity as well. And right now, we're working very closely with the Golden Vines scholarship programme. And this year we have over £200,000 of scholarships which are available for candidates, which if they're successful, they have the option of coming joining the MW programme. And we had 2 BIPOC students who actually joined us last year, and we're hoping that number will grow again this year.
Nice.
So we have a variety of different committees who are set up, who are made of Masters of Wine, who will be trying to address what we consider to be the important issues of the day. So whether that is sustainability, we have a really active programme there which is looking at our own carbon footprint, measuring the carbon cost, but also looking at what mitigation we can put in place to help reduce our carbon footprint. Obviously COVID was a great help in that regard, but I'm not sure that was planned. But we also have a diversity committee. We have an events committee which is looking at our webinar program, looking at what the key issues of the day, bringing in external speakers to help inform both our students, MWs, but also the trade in general. And also we've got a very active trips committee where we'll be arranging student trips around the globe, and likewise trips for MWs where they have the opportunity, and I went on a trip 3 years ago to Chile, which was about a 10-day trip where we went for the length and breadth of the country, meeting importers and getting a real detailed insight as to what's happening in the wine world in Chile at that moment in time.
Sarah, how about you? You know, what brought you in the wine business?
So I am a bit different because I don't have a background in wine. So I used to do a really similar program for a professional body, similar job, sorry, for a professional body that was involved in teaching teachers in the UK. So I ran the exams, I ran the study program, and then I saw this job, which was basically the same job title, really similar responsibilities, but in the wine trade. And I thought, that's the most exciting job I've ever seen. So immediately applied and joined. So nice. I've kind of just begun my journey in the wine trade, I suppose. So I've been working here for 2 years, but it's been challenging, I would say, over the last 2 years because things have been so different and we've had to really adapt.
So I think, you know, Adrian, I'm going to ask you a little bit more about breaking down your role. You know, would love to know, what does your day look like? You know, what do you do in the morning? What like, let's say, you know, Sarah is in your team, but what other team dynamics are there? Who reports to you, or who do you report to?
We have a small team. We're about 13 people. We have a couple of people based overseas, one in Australia, one in the US to cover our activities there. And then the rest are all office based here in London, which is a purpose-built office which was established in 2016. My day is, well, no 2 days are ever the same. It's a really fascinating role in the sense that we have a key part of our activity is education, which Sarah can explain in a little bit more detail. But we are fundamentally a membership organisation, so we have 420 Masters of Wine around the world in 30 different countries with all sorts of demands and challenges, so we're engaging with them on a regular basis. We have a whole committee structure, which is a process whereby MWs are able to express their opinions and influence.
So let's pause there so I understand. Yeah. What is the structure? So there is a committee structure.
So we would have the overarching decision-making body is council. So that would be our board.
Okay, so that's the chairman which you were before.
And that's headed by a chair who is currently Neil Hadley, who is based in Australia.
Are allowed? How many are there as a chairman?
It's the chair is a 2-year role. So I was the chair for 2 years. Neil was a vice chair. When I stepped down, he then assumed the role. And he's currently coming towards the end of his 2-year period. Okay. And he will be replaced in September by a lady called Kathy van Sale, who is an MW based in South Africa, down in the Cape.
So chairs are like more advisors, how you would have in the, let's say, a business firm, right? Like more of a, voting and
yes,
so on.
Without a doubt. So the chair then has a board, which we call council, which is a group of, I think we're 14 people. It is a number that varies a little bit. And people are voted onto council by the members.
Got it. By the MWs.
By MWs.
All right.
So every year we have an annual general meeting.
Got it.
Where the chair will give feedback, and more specifically I will talk about the detail of the activities.
And you are what we call like a CEO?
Absolutely.
Running the...
Absolutely.
Okay.
Pretty much.
So we run, it's a little business.
Sure, yeah.
But it's quite interesting in that it's got a...
And this is a profit and loss sort of business, right? You have an income and you have to manage your expenses.
Absolutely. We're a non-for-profit organisation.
Sure.
We tend to run our budget on a break-even basis. And within that, we get revenue from students who participate in the program.
Got it.
We get revenue from our members who
Got it.
pay a subscription every year. And we also get some revenue from supporters who are wine companies who are happy to be associated and share a lot of the values and the ethos that the Institute of Masters of Wine stands for. Okay, so this is the MW office. It's purpose built. Everybody's looking very worried now. So Luke who's running, who runs the office. Belinda's just run out of shot. She's looking after all of our events. We have marketing and comms here. The education team are based here. We have finance just behind you, and then here's my little office just in the corner. I don't tend to spend too much time in the office. I'm much more interested in being around in the trade and meeting our MWs and seeing everything that's going on. But this is a purpose-built office, and for me it serves us very, very well. This is our annual review, so every year we do a full review which is sent out to our supporters and sent out to all of our MWs, and is the basis of the annual general meeting where we will give a detailed update to all of the members of the activities we've undertaken in every aspect of the Institute's life, whether that's through education, whether it's through our committees, whether that could be in sustainability or diversity, which we have a strong commitment towards, whether it's the finances. It's a proper business, you know, and we're very open and transparent, and we share everything with our members. And we give them regular updates as to the activities.
Sarah, I think one of the clear value prop would be, for a candidate who would want to join the program, would be the first question is, what is Master of Wine? Who is Master of Wine? In fact, I don't even know what or who, right? So how would you define Master of Wine?
How would I define it? I suppose the key thing is there are two key aspects of that, I would say. One is that they've passed the Master of Wine exam, which is in 3 parts. So you've got the practical exam, the theory exam, and then a research paper. And that's pretty difficult to do, and it's a really big undertaking. So the practical exam, you have 3 practical papers. They're all 12 wine flights, which are completely blind, and they've got 2 hours and 15 minutes to answer a lot of questions about those wines. So not just about identification of what the wine is, but how good quality is it or not, and where might it be sold. Then there's 5 theory papers. Those are about 3 hours each, give or take, where they'll have to write 2 or 3 essays in that time on different topics. So it might be the business of wine, it might be viticulture, it might be contemporary issues. Once they've got through all of that, they'll then write a research paper, usually 8,000 to 10,000 words, an original piece of research. So a Master of Wine is someone who's passed all of that. But really crucially, it's also someone that signed the Code of Conduct. So that's something which is basically, it dictates how a Master of Wine will go about their business and the ways that they'll behave. And so once all of that has happened, they become a Master of Wine, they join the IMW as a member, and they can use MW after their name.
And what is the Code of Conduct? What are the values which they have to carry, as you said?
So things like commercial probity, so making sure that you're undertaking your business in a way that is fair and just and doesn't give, what's the phrase that it uses, that doesn't make the wine trade look bad. It's kind of right and proper. We also have lots of things in there about diversity at the moment as well, so making sure that we treat people fairly and that we are kind and honest and all of those sorts of things.
Nice. So, for the program, you said there are 3 parts. Are each is there a prerequisite, and then you move to the other part? You have to pass the practical first, and then theory, and then again the research is the last part, right?
The research is the last part. So you do have quite a few steps to get onto the program, and then to get to the point of even submitting the research paper. So the first thing you've got to do is get through the admission stage. So you'll have to pass an eligibility check to show that you've got all the right things in place before you even start. So that's that you've got the right qualifications, that you've been in the wine trade for at least 3 years, and that you are an active professional member of the wine trade. You then, once you've passed that check, part of the admissions process is to write an application form. So that talks about your motivations, why you want to become a master of wine. It asks you to talk about, do you have the time? Because it's, it's a big undertaking. How are you planning to make sure you get everything done? And then you also do an entrance exam. So that's one...
a physical entrance exam?
So it's online, actually, so that it's kind of a bit more accessible to people around the world. But tasting and theory. So you'll do a a tasting with some wines that are seen, so you know what they are, but you'll write a tasting note, and then a theory essay as well. All of that is looked at holistically. If you get onto the program, you're then in stage 1. That's essentially a foundation stage. So at that point, you're not looking to actually sit the exam that I told you about, the big practical and theory one. You're learning about what the MW exam is, how you might approach the questions. It's quite a big step from diploma. The way that you answer questions is quite different. And so we're really trying to help people to understand how they do it
and
at that point.
For the qualification part, I think there is a myth or maybe a fact, like they say that you have to pass WSET first and then, this and that. So what are the exact sort of, who all can apply?
So people who can apply need to meet the eligibility criteria. So those 3 are, the first one you mentioned is the diploma. So
and
it's
is that
not
WSET?
only WSET diploma, it's that you have to have the WSET diploma or equivalent. So there are other equivalent organizations, other equivalent qualifications. It might be a BA in enology, it might be a MSc in viticulture, there's other things that we would count as equivalent, and we've got a sort of database of things that we...
Like a microbiology course and even the university courses, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Winemaking course.
And I would say the reason we're putting this in place is not to be exclusive or elitist. We want everybody who is engaged in the program to genuinely run the risk of succeeding. And our experiences is that people, historically, if they came in without that firm trade background and understanding, or with a certain level of base knowledge, they just didn't succeed. And kind of morally, I feel that's a little bit of a problem. So the reason we put these eligibility criteria in is just to try and identify those high-performing individuals who we genuinely believe. And when Sarah says it's a holistic study, it's an incredible amount of work that is undertaken by a small group of really committed MWs who are trying to find those people. We think they've got what it takes to succeed.
Oh, so even let's say you got this 100 applicants, and then after that, how would you evaluate who gets in the program? What happens then?
So we'll look at everything that they've submitted as part of their application. So
And we meaning like you and this office, or a lot of MWs?
A committee of MWs who are called the admissions committee. So they oversee the process, and then we also get some other MWs involved to mark the entrance exams. So we get lots of different people to look at each application, and they'll mark the entrance exams, or they might read all of the personal statements and things and give some feedback, and then all of that is collated. So for each individual student, we will be looking at all of their previous work history, where they've come from, how long they've been in the trade, their entrance exam marks, their reference. We get an MW reference as well, or somebody else senior in the wine trade. We'll see how good that reference was. We'll look at the personal statement. We look across all of that and then try and make a balanced judgment about whether or not.
I think you really are gauging their discipline, right? Like, will they really be focused and disciplined enough? Is that because are there any criterias, or you have to make sure that this is a pass rate, otherwise you just think it's becoming tougher? Or how do you balance the passing rate versus, versus new applicants? I don't even know, what is your passing rate, let's say?
For new applicants coming into the program? It depends year on year, to be honest. So we don't set targets where we would say 50% of people have to get onto the program, so it's the top 50. That's not how we do it. We try and make a decision based on, do we really think these people are actually going to be successful when they join the program. So for example, last year we instituted something new where we did a check that meant that people who weren't eligible for the program they weren't even able to apply, so we kind of got rid of them at the first stage. So that meant last year our acceptance rate was a bit higher than normal. So sort of
depends on the candidates as well, right?
And it depends on the
Without a
candidates,
doubt, without a
like
doubt.
this year you got a great,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah,
people
yeah.
applying. So for example,
So exactly, and that's kind of true across the board. Really, it's more about how many people meet the grade and how
Yeah.
many people get to the level that we would say is successful, rather than us setting quotas.
Yeah, we have no quotas, and there's no. We need such a certain percentage to pass. This is absolute in terms of this is the standard. If people are good enough to get on the program, we give them the opportunity to do so. If they're good enough to pass the stage 2 exam, which Sarah will talk about now,
yeah,
they're good. They're good enough. There is no directive
got it.
from above, and certainly no challenge of us as an organisation to say we've got to get 30 people over the line this year. And
So
in fact,
how-
if there was,
how-
we would kick against that.
How much time does it take? Like, what is the hours you have to put in, or years or months? You know, if you had to, like, if I had to ask you, you know, I want to start, I want to do it. How much is it? How much time will it take? You know, do you mind sharing that?
It's a pretty difficult question to answer, just because it depends a bit on your background, but I'll
Okay.
do my best. So, absolute.
So it's a self-study, is that why?
Self-study, yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
self-study.
So some people might come in with a huge amount of tasting knowledge. Some people might have less. So you might have to spend more time or less time, if you see what I mean. So it depends a little bit. But in terms of the number of years, the absolute minimum is 3 years. So that will take you through stage 1, assuming you pass that first time.
So I have to finish in 3 years, basically. That's the
Three years is
maximum
the
time.
No, that would be the
That's
minimum.
the minimum time.
Okay.
So the maximum would be up to about 10 years.
Wow. Okay.
Depending on which stage you pass at which point,
Got it.
basically. So, you know, we're governed by, you have a certain amount of attempts at the stage 2 exam,
Got
a
it.
certain amount of attempts at the stage 1 exam. So some people will come in, pass them all, and just
So
get it all
stage
done.
1 in
Some
year
don't.
1, stage 2 in year 2,
So even
research
minimum is 3
paper in
years.
stage 3.
Minimum is 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's
And
it is
and
a real
that's,
commitment.
you're considering like what, 10 hours a week sort of commitment on an average?
I think it is. It's really different, but I wouldn't say that's unfair.
Yeah.
So it might be
Wow.
more. Yeah.
It's a
pretty
big
intense.
undertaking.
It's
It's
really
pretty
big.
intense, yes.
Yeah.
for sure.
So if I had to really, you know, if there was a KPI, like key performance indicators,
Yeah.
let's say, right? Like when you started, and if we evaluate how you performed, for example,
Yeah, for
you know,
sure.
excuse my business
No,
terminology.
no,
here.
fantastic, fantastic. yeah.
So what would be the metrics, like number of new MWs you got, the profitability factor?
Okay, no, really, I mean, that's a really great question. Again, because I come from a business background, I'm very comfortable with that. Look, we work on a break-even basis, so we have a budget that we work to.
Okay.
And it's our challenge to try and balance that whilst delivering all of our activities. So
Right.
whether that's events for MWs, activities for students, education, we have a webinar program, we would typically organise trips, both for students and for MWs, where it's an opportunity to engage with the trade all around the world. There's a whole host of different activities that we
Understood.
would be involved with. And fundamentally, I report that back to council. Typically, we used to have a council meeting every 3 months.
Okay.
We're now working on a 2-month basis, but during the COVID period, when things were evolving on a daily basis, we had meetings every month. Whereby
And in
we
that
were,
there would be like different channels, right? Like this is the tasting revenue. This would be like
oh, absolutely. We were looking at all of our activities. We will be reporting on where our challenges are, how it impacts upon the budget, what activities we're taking to either shore budget shortfalls or to, it's just typical business management.
yeah, yeah.
And we're very comfortable doing that. We work on there's a no surprise
and
basis
then I guess
here.
in your team you would have, okay, you know, here's the education captain, here's the tasting, you know, events.
Absolutely.
You know,
so we would
driver.
have a head of education, we have a head of marketing and communications,
Got it.
and we have a head of finance.
And then there's a big thing of reputation, which is sort of you have to maintain, right? That whole integrity.
Without a doubt, yeah.
What sort of things? How do you measure that? It's so hard to, you know, measure reputation.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We spend a lot of time working with trademark lawyers to uphold our trademarks all around the world. And in fact, one of the interesting measurements, if you like, is we've never had so many trademark challenges as we have had over the last 2 years.
Wow. Okay.
And I think that reflects the fact that we've remained incredibly active during this COVID period. And what you say is quite right. I think we enjoy an incredible reputation, which has been developed over a long period of time. You know, the first exam was held in 1953. The institute was set up in 1955. So we're nearly 70 years as an institute, and the activities that we've engaged with, the quality of people who have graduated and become Masters of Wine, all of this builds towards establishing this, I think, enviable reputation. And I'm in an interesting situation of being both an MW. I graduated in '93. It was a lot easier in those days, I think, than it is now. But I look at it from an MW perspective. But now I'm looking at it from an institute perspective in terms of what can we do? What are the activities that we can engage with, both to raise the profile of the institute, raise the profile of the individual members, because more than anything, we're a function of our members. So if they're engaged in positive activities, we like to make people aware of that, and to make sure that any activity that we do engage is consistent with our values, it is of a high enough standard, and we challenge ourselves constantly to make sure that we perform at a level that we think is appropriate for an MW working in an increasingly complex and complicated global wine trade. So it's a fascinating challenge, and you're absolutely right. What are the matrices to measure? I'm not sure we've really defined what those are, but we know there's always work to be done to both protect our reputation and to enhance our reputation.
So I recently had a chat with Susan, you know, on the and I do ask this question to, you know, a lot of MWs on how any moments or any memories on how this changed, you know, before and after. So maybe this can be you can be an example of your, you know, like before MW, how you know, where do you think, let's say if I'm just again putting in the context with, let's say I'm a Harvard MBA graduate versus a normal, you know, how you started being perceived and how it actually helped you in business as well.
Well, when I became an MW, I was working in a large corporate, which is now Diageo. I'd been there for the best part of 15 years. And becoming an MW, I left Diageo to become the managing director of a publicly quoted wine business in South Africa, where I was using my MW qualifications just to help try and build this business at a time. Well, for the South African wine industry, it was a fascinating time to be there and to be heavily involved in activities.
Like what skills in particular got enhanced? You know, like you really took an approach which was different.
Yeah, it's very much. I think look, in order to pass the program, you need a thorough understanding of every single aspect of the wine business. So you're talking about every aspect of viticulture. You're talking about every aspect of winemaking, bottling, all the commercial aspects, the financial aspects. And also I think there is this sort of historical context and the cultural importance of wine. And I think all of those skills are really, really relevant if you're going to go into a general management role, which is where I went. And without doubt, if you're talking to journalists, if you're talking to buyers, having an MW attached to your name gives you a certain degree of credibility. It's not always a door opener, but they know you're serious about wine. I think we talked earlier on about the reputation. Well, anybody who's got through the program, they've got to be pretty committed, they've got to be pretty smart, and they will need to know the ins and outs of the wine business, not just identifying a Grand Cru Burgundy at 50 paces. You know, I'm more interested in, as we talked earlier on, you know, return on investment, you know, employment of capital, staff issues, commercial legislation, depending on where you're selling wine in the world. You need to understand all of that in order to be able to run a wine business. And you need to understand all of that to become a master of wine. So I think the disciplines and the level of knowledge you need will enhance your career, whatever career path that you choose to take as a newly qualified MW. And I think one of the wonderful things about our membership is it's a really broad church, both in terms of age range. We have people on the one hand who want to be spoken to with handwritten notes, to people who will only communicate via Instagram. We have people who are planting, who are making wine, writing books, education.
So coming back, I think maybe Sarah, you can help answer here as well, and Adrian, you can jump in. But if I had to assess my ROI for the program, number one is how much is it? If it's, let's say, £10,000 or 15,000, I don't even know. But let's say if there is a number to it, and my time value, how does it give me return on investment? Like, have you seen some really black and white case studies that as soon as you graduate, 20%, 30% incomes, you can start earning more?
I think it's really different. As Adrian talked about before, we have so many different types of MW who do so many different things. So some people might become an MW and then suddenly think, right, I'm going to change my career and go freelance. I was talking to somebody in Canada actually who did that exact thing and felt that having the MW gave her that freedom, particularly because she was the first MW in a certain region in Canada. So she felt like it completely changed her career. Other people, that's not necessarily what they're looking for. So some people will become an MW and then stay in the job that they had before because that's the job they love. What they're actually looking for from the MW is either that sense of status or actually just
they want to
become
better.
They just want to become better. By the time you finished it, it's the same as a lot of people who do PhDs or other things. It's about the love of the subject more than it is about suddenly earning loads more money. So I think the option is there, I imagine, if people want to use that profile and they want to build it, but not everybody does.
People's motivation, people's motivations are very, very different. But what happens is when you become an MW, you become a part of an incredible network. We're now 420 MWs worldwide, and I sometimes think we underplay that, but it is an incredibly strong network of people who are, I think, very influential within their sphere of activities within the wine trade, and actually they're incredibly collegiate. We've just come back from North America where for 2 weeks we're running our first residential seminars in over 2 years, and the sense of camaraderie that exists amongst that group, and I think we can be a genuine force for good because we have people who are,
I think people do look up for sure. Like I'm a big fan, as I said, of Tim Hanai and like Peter, who runs the Napa Academy.
Yeah, Peter Marks.
Like he's like the rock star, right?
Top guy. Top guy.
People admire him. So for sure.
Little guy.
I think let's go back on a couple of business questions. If maybe you can wear your experience hat.
Yes.
If you were asked a business challenge of, this is my $12.99 wine, I want to make it to a $14.99 wine and go a little premiumization,
Yeah, sure.
What approach, what are the right questions you would think of?
You've got to look inherently whether or not you've got the ability to deliver a wine which is of the quality to deliver against that price point would be my starting
But let's
point.
assume it's definitely got that quality,
sure.
Where you can write the $2 more price. How would you approach this? What does a rollout of this kind of thing look like? How would you buy distributors on board? How would you buy retailers? Maybe you have had this kind of experience, or if you had any other
very
business.
much so. I mean, I was involved in merging 3 different wine businesses together, and within that we had wines at lots of different price points. The idea of just putting the price up, we're in a market which is chronically oversupplied, so customers, they're not daft. If they've been enjoying something at £12 and it's suddenly gone up to 15, they're going to be asking the question why. So I think you need to understand your route to market. First and foremost, you've got to look at the returns that you're going to get depending on what that route to market is. You've got to make sure that from a quality perspective that you have something which really delivers, and I think you've got to be looking at a true point of difference. I always would say to my sales teams when I spoke to them, I said, look, the buyers you're talking to, the minute you walk out the door, the next guy from Italy is in, and then 2 hours later it's somebody from Argentina, and they've all got the same story. You've got to be very, very clear about what it is about the wine that you're offering that makes it stand out from the pack, and why it's going to succeed. Why is a buyer going to take a punt on you? As we move more towards direct to consumer, what is the communication? What is it that's going to get people to come back and buy your wine again? And you have to give people a really good reason for that.
True.
So it's it's proper FMCG.
Exactly.
The idea of talking about it's SO4 root stock. The buyer's fallen asleep and a customer hasn't got a clue what you're talking about. You've got to try and relate to the business, and you've got to relate to your consumer, and you've got to get a very clear message out there, and you've got to do it quickly in a marketplace which is actually incredibly competitive and fragmented from a wine perspective. But I would always say is, you're not just competing against the wine industry, you're competing against spirits, as we spoke earlier. Spirits is booming. So why is it people are going to drink this glass of wine and not have a gin and tonic or a cocktail? You've got to think of, you're competing for share of throat against Coca-Cola or against coffee, against cannabis, which is coming into that sort of into that space. So we have to be really cognizant of what makes wine unique. And what is going to make people feel good about themselves about drinking a glass of wine above any other beverage. And therefore, whether you're looking at something at £15, at £5, or at £50, you need to have a really, really clear understanding of what it is that you're offering, which is going to make a consumer happy about drinking your product. And that's a fantastic challenge. And I personally, I think wine is unique, and I think it has a lot of really positive attributes, which is why the wine market is a large global market. But we should be under no illusions that it's really challenging. It's incredibly fragmented. It's pretty confusing for a lot of consumers, and right now it's pretty static.
So where are you seeing growth in terms of market size growth and also applicant growth, right? I believe Asia would be one country, a region where you may be, I don't know, I may be wrong, but America for sure, I think I'm seeing growth as well.
The US would be our biggest market for students right now. And I think that's fascinating to see, because it reflects the true global nature of the wine trade. When we started as an institute in 1955...
So you're seeing more applications from...
Oh, without a doubt, And we currently have more students in North America than anywhere else in the world.
Great.
And I think that reflects where the global wine trade sits right now. I say, if you look at the analogy with 1955, it was arguable, but the UK was probably the centre of the global wine trade. But the reality is, it's still a big market, but it is no longer the centre. And I think the way the Institute has become more international. So about 50% of our MWs are outside of the UK right now.
And do you focus mainly on English-speaking countries? Because I've not found much in France or Germany or Spain. It's like very less numbers, right?
No, we run programs in all of those different markets. In fact, we for people who UK English is not their primary language, they have the opportunity to answer in their mother tongue, and we translate that.
For the theory exam.
For theory.
The course is delivered in English though, so people would need to
know.
Exactly,
really,
and they do their practical in English as well. So.
What has changed? So coming back on the COVID part, for the course, and maybe this is something which you can really help us here. What has changed before, in the course? Like, what does the new course look like?
So it's been quite a journey. So usually everything would be face-to-face. So the typical year is that a student would have access to a seminar, which is a week-long face-to-face residential, to 4 course days, which are individual standalone days, which are also face-to-face. They'd often travel to another country to attend those. And then we would have some additional bits and pieces on top of that, which is virtual. So assignments is basically like coursework, essentially. They'd send us essays, we mark them, send it back. Then suddenly nobody could travel, which was sort of the basis of the whole program. And so we had to work quite quickly to think about how we could do something differently. What we ended up with was a program where we were sending out samples globally to all of our students.
Oh, wow.
So we have students in, last year it was about 36 countries. So we had sampling operations in 4 different countries. We had shipments sending out to everybody to make sure that they could still do their tasting practice, basically. One of the key parts of the study program is 12 wine blind flights, giving people the chance to taste 12 wines at once, do a practice paper, really get exam practice. So we were sending those out all around the world. People were logging in on Zoom. We were doing feedback sessions. And then we did lots of other things as well. So we were doing some webinars. We were doing, each student had an opportunity to have a one-on-one call with a master of wine just to talk about anything that they might want. So we had, I think over 100 masters of wine sign up. They told us what they could help students with, and people.
And this was not there before, so they were
none
just
of
like
that was there
not
before.
at all.
No. So
I think emotionally as well, you had to keep the applicants up, right? Like,
Yeah.
Oh, without a doubt. But I think what Sarah's just described there is that incredible sense of community that exists
They
within
nominated
the
and they said,
membership.
"Oh,
Yeah, exactly.
There is a real sense of giving back.
And that is still part of the course now? Like you do get Zoom lessons and you do,
Yeah. So one thing we've actually started to look at is spending a bit more time. I mean, we've returned to face-to-face as much as we can. We currently can't do that for all students because just travel restrictions are really different. So we still have an online version for some students this year, but for most we're returning back to face-to-face. But now we're supplementing that with more online things and actually doing more of the practical tasting face-to-face and then adding a bit more theory online because that seemed to work really well. So we are continuing to sort of learn and evolve the program over these, even now as we return to normal, because I think there were some benefits to it. Some of it was harder to do, and some of it I think worked really well. So we're trying to hold on to those bits.
So, a question for students who are applying or even currently studying. How would they maintain their grit? Any tips you have for them in keeping the motivation high and in making sure it's more practical that they apply these techniques and it will help them?
Okay, good question. It's difficult, I think, and I think one of the key things that I see is that you get a lot of students who have done exceptionally well in their academic careers for their whole lives. And then they come to the MW and they might get some bad marks or things might not be as easy as it's previously been. And I think the key thing that I see in those who are successful and make it through is that they're very humble and they're able to just say, okay, you know what, that's gone badly. And they're curious about why that might have gone badly and they're open to feedback. I think students that can be open and listen to people and just kind of think, you know what, this is going to be a journey and it's going to take a long time and they can accept that, I think that makes a really big difference. And I think the other thing is being realistic about where your weaknesses are. I think it's a very broad syllabus, and if at the beginning you don't say, you know what, there are bits of this that I am a lot weaker at, and you really start working on that and you really start being self-critical, I think it will be more difficult to get to the end. And I also think really using the network is really important. You have so many Masters of Wine, so many students around you to help.